Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hi, welcome to the show, everybody. My guest today is Stormy Hill, and we're going to be talking about big T's and little T's. And we've talked about little T trauma before, and those are those traumas that are not quite as significant. So maybe cutting your finger versus cutting your finger off, for an example. So we're going to talk about the big T's and little T's. So Stormy, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you. So happy to be here. Happy Friday to everybody.
Yeah. When you're listening to this, I know you're going to be listening on a Wednesday, but we're recording on a Friday. So, yes. And we're both feeling Friday fever, that's for sure.
Definitely.
So, I'd like you to start out with talking about one of your big T traumas, which is around your son's birth. So why don't you tell us that story, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really beautiful example of how sometimes our, deepest traumas lead to our kind of greatest gold as we heal them and integrate them. And that certainly was the case for me with my son. He's now 17. He's sitting just outside the room doing his own schoolwork. But it was sort of traumatic even conceiving him. He was in vitro times like 3. We were doing high tech in vitro, couldn't get pregnant, couldn't stay pregnant, all those things that can be so challenging for a woman in a coupleship to go through. And then we finally did conceive him through ICSI, and my pregnancy was not easy. I was in medical school and working like 100 hours a week, and it was not an easy pregnancy, yet I was so happy to be pregnant. And then I really was stubborn, man. I'm so stubborn. I wanted to birth him naturally, and I wanted to have him at home, and like my mom did us, and my husband, who's my ex-husband, but my husband at the time was like, what's wrong with you? Epidurals are a great thing. But I just it was really important to me. And looking back, I'm so grateful that no midwife would take me, because I was high risk. And because of what I'm about to share, I would have for sure died if I had him at home and had my way, so to speak. So anyway, I conceded and had him in the hospital, found a great doctor who was willing to let me go naturally without an epidural if I wanted. And 32 hours of labor later, I gave birth to my beautiful son, 8 pounds and 3 ounces of him. And immediately after, I wasn't feeling very well, but I just birthed for 32 hours. So I was a first time mom, so I didn't know. Long story short, I started hemorrhaging profusely, and I had a retained placenta, and I ended up going into what they call DIC, but I was bleeding to death very quickly. And so 11 blood transfusions later, they were able to, and two units of platelets were able to save my life. But I had a near-death experience. I left my body and watched the whole thing transpire from the upper right-hand corner of the room. Like, even talking about it now, 17 years later, I can still feel it in my body. I can see the top of the surgeon's cap and like what it looked like, and was watching the whole scene, like out of body. Wow. And watching my husband say like, please don't go. And like, standing right there over me. And it was, very bloody and carnage and all of the above. And then I saw my son laying there in his little, wrapped up in his little, little incubator thing. And it was just wild, Tracy, because it was this like, I would say visceral, but I was out of body. So it was this deep desire to nurse him, not even to like be his mom or watch him grow up or anything ethereal or intellectual like that. It was this desire to nurse him, to feel him on my skin, because I had not had that yet.
Right.
And it was watching that and seeing him snap me back into my body, into excruciating pain. But I came back, and my son is, like I said, is 17, and he is my greatest teacher in this life. He has had his struggles for sure, and he's my greatest teacher and my greatest joy, and also, as parents can understand, sometimes my greatest frustration. So
Oh, yes.
yeah.
Yeah, I totally get it. Well, wow, that's quite a story. Especially, the part about you watching everything that's going on. I've heard that happening before, and it just awes me that, we can go out of our bodies and see what's happening around us, and be able to make that decision to go back in. I'm glad you
Yeah,
did.
it was really wild. Thank you. Me too. I just feel that very tenderly right now. But yeah, and what a beautiful like metaphor looking back. Like I wanted so badly to be with him, to feel him against me, to nurse him. And then when I got it back in my body, it was like excruciating pain,
Right.
And like, I mean, and I'm sure that's partly what got me out of my body. I don't really know, but like, it was so painful that like, I couldn't handle the pain. I couldn't stay in my body. Right. And we know that happens so often in trauma. And it was very intense for me of, being on the brink of death and also disembodying. Right.
Yeah. Now, with your medical background, I'm sure you've experienced a lot of different types of trauma. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about the big T's and the little T's and what those differences are? I know I gave the analogy of, like a paper cut versus cutting your finger off, but there's so much more to it.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that question. It's like having worked, for 20 some years in mental health, I think, gosh, I love the idea of big T's and little T's, because partly why I like that is it has let's say it has a soft way of normalizing, or maybe not normalizing, it's not the right, non-pathologizing, taking the pathology out of trauma, right? Because we all have trauma. We all have big T's and little T's, and they're very individual. Something that might be a big T for me could land as a little T for someone else. And that's not because they're tougher or I'm less tough, right? There's so much that plays into it: genetics and temperament and disposition and family of origin, and also just like my resilience, right? And which again is not a judgment thing, but resilience,
Right.
and we know the research in trauma, like, and the whole point is it doesn't matter how it lands in someone else. It matters how it landed in you. And if your body felt like you could fight or fight or flee, and if not, it lodges in my system as trauma, right? It lodges in my nervous system. And so I just like the idea of little T's and big T's, like, because it takes out some of the pathologizing of trauma. And because with pathologizing comes shame and guilt and blame and all of the above, right?
Right.
So I just think that's a lovely, and if I look back on my life, like, I really meant what I said at the start of our interview, is that it's not to invalidate the pain and the struggle and the hurt that can come with trauma of all sorts, but I do really believe that there is gold in the healing of the trauma. It might be the distancing from it might be the integrating of it might be the lessons it taught you, and that's not at all to invalidate like, it sucks when you're in it. It sucks when you're going through it,
Right.
and so can we be in both, and like for my son, having gone through that experience was a very big T for me. I got so sick after, because I had my blood volume replaced like several times over. I was very ill in the hospital. I couldn't be with my son. I mean, all these things. And then he got really sick with a life-threatening illness at 3 months. And so it was just like the first 12 months of his life were so traumatic for him and for me. And yet I'm so thankful for it. It has made me, I mean, being a mom has been my greatest gift in my life. And so it was let's just say a bumpy, rocky, traumatic start for both he and I. And yet here we are, and we have a really sweet, a really close relationship. And who knows, maybe part of that is what we went through together at the start. Who knows?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. In a sense, he saved your life if you think
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. Thanks. I never really thought of it that way. That's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Because if it wasn't for him, you may not have gone back into your body. But that strong urge to go to him and be with him is what ultimately connected you back to your body again.
Yeah, totally. And then the irony, I couldn't breastfeed anyway because like I had hemorrhaged so much my breast milk didn't come in. But but again, it wasn't even about that. It was about this desire, right? And isn't that such an interesting thing? Like if you take like an ethereal view of it, we have such a desire to bond and to connect and to belong. And like that's what brought me back, this desire to bond with my child.
Yeah. You have another story too, about big T's and little T's with your ex-husband. So why don't you tell us that one?
Yeah, it's and I laugh because again it's like, gosh man, well, I'll just sum it up. I was in he and I, my ex-husband and I, created this beautiful child that you just heard all about, and I think that was why we were together. Everything else was like my stubbornness or my who knows what it was, my ego. But he would also say that we were literally together to create our child, and we were not a great partnership, but man, we were committed to trying to work it out, which is great, and I honor that. But we were in a very passionless, dysfunctional, mostly sexless marriage, and for 12 years, and I was like really dying inside, so to speak. I felt like a shell of who I am. And fast forward to say, I ended up ending my marriage, or we ended our marriage, and we co-parent fabulously. So that's just a really big gift. But it led me to really dive into sexuality and sensuality and to passion and pleasure and commit my life to it. And so I have practiced for the last 15 years myself, and then 3 years ago officially and formally became a sex educator and guide. And so now it's my privilege to guide men, women, and couples back into their pleasure, into their passion. And that's like it. I mean that in and outside of the bedroom, right? So really to feel passionate and alive and vibrant in and out of the bedroom. And so I just think, wow, what an interesting journey because it was very traumatic for me, and we dealt with a lot of challenging issues around honesty and transparency and all these really tough things for couples to navigate. But it led me to my greatest like passion and honor in the work world, and in what I get to do in this world, which is to help people find their way back to their sexiness, to their sexual energy as like a superpower, like of energy to guide their day. And that's not just in sex, it's not just in the bedroom. So that's my other I guess trauma that led to gold, maybe.
From passionless to passion, full of passion. Living large. It's so interesting how so many of us take our traumas and we learn from them and create a future accordingly. So if I hadn't been abused, if I hadn't been raped or assaulted, I probably would not be a trauma recovery coach today.
Yeah.
Total.
That's so, I mean, and even just saying that, I mean, I just really felt that in my body when you said it. But it's like, it's so brave to use what has hurt us, and to turn it into like our own work, and then also to like sublimate it into helping others. I mean, it really is like superhero level.
Right. How can we do that? How can we move from those traumas, the big and little, into something? And it doesn't have to mean that that you create a career around it or anything like that, but we move from trauma into creating a life for ourselves that's beautiful despite our trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even say like, yeah, I love that. And I would even like really encourage and invite anyone listening to like alongside of our traumas, right? Like it's not about moving past them or pushing them aside. We know that doesn't work, even though, my gosh, I can really relate. I tried to do that. It keeps showing up, right? But as we heal and as we integrate, we also reclaim that power that we may have, depending on the trauma. But even no matter what, there was a relinquishing of power, and we sort of reclaim that power and reclaim our wholeness and reclaim our healing. And I love the analogy of like, I always thought this even before I got into mental health, but I always thought, scars are beautiful. Like whenever I was younger or, in my 20s and dating, I'd always want to know about every scar I could see. These are the visible scars, right? Because it tells a story. And the same for our internal scars. They do tell our story, right?
Absolutely. I was cleaning off my desk today and going through some old notes, and I found this piece of paper, and I think this was from a time when I was watching Jan Van Zandt, and a quote that I wrote down that says, one of the things a woman does is to learn how to tell her story, not from the place of brokenness and victimhood, but from the truth of who she is. And that just kind of fits so perfectly with what we're talking about right now.
Totally. It's so beautiful.
Accept our story, and it's part of us. Our trauma is part of us. So it's not who we are, but it's part of who we are,
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And like the wholeness, like part of who we are, and all of our, I kind of was like, really, I would say like overly committed to my sparkly parts, let's just say. For the longest time. I look back at journals, and I had this thing that was like, keep smiling. Like I signed cards that way, and before even where there was emails, but then it was emails, and I think of that, and of course, like that's a beautiful intention, right? Keep smiling. But it was a bypass for me looking back in hindsight. It was like, oh, everything's good, smile, 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 grin and bear it, bite the bullet, and now I have such a different approach to that. Now I'd be like, forget that. Like, smile if you want to smile, cry if you want to cry, yell if you want to yell.
Right. Feel your feelings.
Yeah. And if smiling is where you are, great. So beautiful. But I really do believe that, a woman, anyone, but we're talking women, right? Like a woman's like beauty and a woman's power lies in all of her parts, like the sparkly and the parts we label less sparkly,
I love that, our sparkly parts. That's awesome.
Sparkly parts and shitty parts, but
there you go.
And they're not shitty. We just have labeled them as, as not sparkly or not acceptable or not okay or whatever, or the insert myriad of things, Oh
gosh. So there's some work to be done there to help us learn that all our parts are sparkly, not just the fun bits.
Yeah, exactly. I was laughing with my current partner when we were first dating. I said to him, I was like, I don't want to know. I don't want you to put your best foot forward. I actually want you to put your like worst foot forward and see like how it works for me. And he was like, wait, what? And I mean that, like we do this whole put your best foot forward. It's like, no, like, because like do your wound. And that's another thing with trauma. I think when you're looking at partnership and compatibility, like does your wounds line up okay with mine? Like not everyone's wrong or right, but we don't want to be rubbing salt. We don't want like a trauma mate, right? Like we don't want someone who's like constantly triggering our trauma. Some degree of that might be a powerful mirror, but you don't need to be re-traumatized over and over again. So does your partner, does the people you surround yourself with, does your friends, your closest friends, like do they support you in healing rather than like rubbing salt in your wounds? And I think that's an important thing to think about.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I know when Jeff and I first started dating, one of the things he asked me shortly after he learned about my traumas was, what are some of the things that trigger you? Because I want to make sure I don't do that.
That is a very beautiful
Swoon, I'm all yours now.
Yeah, exactly. And then I would say, like, when you do inadvertently, because that was very conscious and thoughtful of him, and maybe some of us are there, maybe some of us aren't, but like, then if you inadvertently trigger your partner and you're putting pressure onto their wounds, like then own that, then be like, wow, and own it and repair and restore and move forward. Like that's also healing, it's like, and I just think I was just saying to one of my clients today, a male client, I said, I really do believe that like dating is like 80%, maybe 90% compatibility, including our traumas, including our wounding. They don't have to match, but can we be sensitive to each other's wounding and trauma? And not even sensitive, like, can we find that as like beautiful in our partner or our potential partner,
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Well, gosh, Stormy, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today.
You are so welcome. It's been really lovely to share some time with you.
Listeners, thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you next week on the show.